You have 48 hours to make a decision, Quinn. Lawrence Fitch set the folder on the conference table with the careful precision of a man who had rehearsed this moment many times. Sign the transfer at the offer price, or we go to the shareholders' vote on Thursday and you lose the seat entirely. Either way, your involvement in this firm is over. Quinn Hartwell looked at him across the table. This man who had sat at her father's dinner table every Christmas for 19 years, who had given a toast at her parents' anniversary, who had held her arm at her father's graveside 2 years ago and wept convincingly. She looked at him and felt nothing except a quiet, clarifying calm. You want me gone in 48 hours, she said. I want what's best for the firm. Lawrence adjusted his tie. You know as well as I do that your heart's never really been in the business side. Your father understood that. He'd have wanted. My father built this company from a drafting table in a rented basement in Cabottown. Her voice was even. I know exactly what he wanted. Lawrence slid the folder toward her. His nephew Brandon, who had no business being in this meeting except that Lawrence had brought him as a witness, tried not to look smug and failed completely. Sign the acknowledgement that you've received the offer, Lawrence said. That's all I'm asking today. You have 48 hours to decide. Quinn picked up the pen. She felt Lawrence relax across from her, felt him mistake her compliance for surrender. She signed the acknowledgement form on the last page, closed the folder and stood. Thank you for being so clear, Lawrence, she said. I'll be in touch. She walked out of the Hartwell plus Fitch Design Group boardroom, with her shoulders straight and her hands steady. She stepped into the elevator, pressed the lobby button, and watched the mirrored doors close on Lawrence Fitch's face. Then she pulled out her phone and called Philip Ben. It happened, she said when he answered. Did you sign the acknowledgement? I did. There was a brief pause, and then Philip said something she hadn't heard from him in the 2 years since her father's death. He laughed, short and sharp, full of satisfaction. Then the trust is active, he said. Come to my office, it's time. 8 months earlier, Quinn had been working late on a Thursday night in the firm's Toronto offices, doing what she always did when the rest of the staff had gone home, pulling apart spreadsheets, looking for the thing that didn't line up. She'd been a detail person her whole life. Her father used to tease her about it, how she'd noticed the single misaligned tile in an otherwise perfect bathroom, the one off-pitch note in an entire symphony, the number that was $3 out of place in a $40,000 budget report. He'd called it her superpower. Lawrence had called it exhausting. The discrepancy she found that Thursday night was not $3. It was a vendor called Northgate Consulting Services Limited, appearing in 14 separate project files over the past 18 months, billing for strategic planning and stakeholder coordination, on projects where Quinn had never seen or approved any such contract. $230,000, then $380,000, then on the Lakeside Commons development, $670,000 billed against a line item she had never seen before in her life. She sat back from her screen and looked at the ceiling. Her first instinct was to pick up the phone and call Lawrence. He was the CFO. He had signing authority over these accounts. If something was wrong, he would want to know. Her second instinct arrived 3 seconds later, quiet and cold. Lawrence already knew. She made copies of everything. She drove home. She didn't sleep. The next morning she canceled her Friday client calls and went downtown to the offices of Ben & Whitfield, the firm her father had used for 30 years. Philip Ben was 71 years old, retired from active practice, and came in twice a week. Quinn had called ahead. He was waiting. I found something, she said, before she'd even taken off her coat. I need to know what to do with it. Philip looked at her over his reading glasses with an expression she remembered from childhood. Careful, unhurried, the face of a man who had been trusted with difficult things before. Show me, he said. She showed him everything. He took his time. When he looked up, his expression had settled into something she couldn't quite name. Quinn, he said, before we talk about what you've found, there's something I need to tell you about your father's estate. She had sat across from Philip in this same office 2 years ago, the week after her father's funeral, red-eyed and hollowed out, barely able to absorb what was said to her. She had nodded at figures and signed where she was told, and trusted that Philip would handle what she was too exhausted to process. She hadn't thought to ask about the trust. Your father never fully trusted Lawrence Fitch with the firm, Philip said. He liked him, they worked well together, but Stewart was a careful man, and he'd noticed things over the years. A contract redirected here, an invoice that didn't quite make sense there. Nothing he could prove, nothing he could act on, but he didn't ignore it either. Quinn was very still. He structured his shares in a trust, Philip continued. On paper, Lawrence believes the firm split evenly after your father's death, 50-50 between you and him, but the actual documentation tells a different story. Stewart held 52%, and he placed those shares in trust for you with specific activation conditions. If Lawrence ever attempted to dilute your shares, remove you from a leadership role, or pressure you to sell below fair market value, the trust activates automatically and the shares transfer to you outright. You become the majority owner. Quinn looked at the window. Outside, the October sky over King Street was the color of old pewter. He knew, she said. Dad knew Lawrence might try something. He suspected, he hoped he was wrong. Philip folded his hands on the desk. He wasn't. Why didn't you tell me? 2 years ago, why didn't you? Because the trust only becomes relevant if Lawrence makes a move. Your father didn't want you carrying that suspicion around for years, watching Lawrence, waiting, poisoning your ability to lead. He wanted you to run the firm in good faith, and he wanted to make sure that if the worst happened, you'd be protected and you'd have what you needed to fight back. Quinn sat with that for a long time. Her father had spent 30 years building Hartwell plus Fitch, from 2 drafting tables in a Cabottown basement into one of the most respected design firms in the country. He'd survived recessions, lost pitches, impossible clients. And in his last act, he had quietly made sure his daughter would never be defenseless. What do I need to do? She asked. Document everything, Philip said. Every irregularity you find, every instance of misconduct, do it carefully and do it quietly. Then wait for Lawrence to make his move. When he does, the trust activates immediately. Quinn called her best friend that evening from the parking garage beneath her building. Robin Adler was a forensic accountant, which was either the most boring or the most interesting job in the world depending on the day. When Quinn told her what she'd found and what Philip had said, Robin was quiet for a long moment. How many files? She asked. 14 that I've found. There may be more. Send them to me tonight. I'll start going through them. Quinn sent the files. Over the following weeks, Robin built a picture that was worse than Quinn had imagined. Northgate Consulting Services Limited was registered in Ontario under a numbered company whose sole director was Brandon Fitch, Lawrence's nephew, the same Brandon who attended meetings he had no business being in and said very little while Lawrence said everything. The company had no employees, no office address, no actual services of any kind. It existed solely on paper to receive transfers from Hartwell plus Fitch, which Lawrence had been authorizing himself quietly for nearly 2 years. When Robin finished her analysis, the total was just over $1.4 million. He's been using the firm's accounts as a personal withdrawal machine, Robin said. When they sat at Quinn's kitchen table going through the report together, every transaction has a legitimate sounding description. Stakeholder coordination, strategic advisory, permitting facilitation, but there's no corresponding work product, no deliverables, no meeting records, nothing. Can we prove it? I've already proven it. Robin tapped the folder. That's what this is. Philip connected Quinn with a private investigator named Frank Ossie, retired RCM, thoroughly unshockable, who traced the Northgate payments through to a bank account in Brandon Fitch's name, and documented Lawrence's pattern of authorizing transactions without Quinn's required co-signature under their partnership agreement. Philip engaged a litigation firm to prepare the necessary filings. Robin prepared a forensic report built to withstand a court challenge, and Quinn kept going to work every day. She sat across from Lawrence in budget reviews and smiled. She attended client dinners and listened to him take credit for projects she had led. She reviewed documents he slid toward her and asked measured questions and said nothing about the things she knew. There were days when she wanted to drop the folder on his desk and watch his face collapse. There were nights in her apartment in the annex when the weight of carrying it felt unbearable. When she sat by the window with a cup of tea gone cold and wondered how much longer. Robin talked her through the worst of those nights. The moment you tip your hand, he moves the money, Robin said once, when Quinn had called her close to midnight. He gets ahead of the documentation. He reframes everything as a misunderstanding and you spend 5 years in court trying to recover $1.4 million while he keeps running the firm. You have one shot at this, Quinn, you wait. And if he never makes a move, then you're still the majority owner of your father's company, and Lawrence Fitch works for you on a very short leash for the rest of his career. That's not a bad outcome either. Quinn went to sleep. She kept waiting. Lawrence made his move in October. In hindsight, she could see how he'd been building toward it for months. gradually repositioning her, steering major client relationships toward himself, introducing her to new prospects as our VP of Creative rather than by her actual title. Excluding her from 2 partner-level conversations she only learned about afterward. He was constructing a record, creating the impression of a firm that operated fine without her. The meeting he called was framed as a routine partners review. Quinn arrived to find Brandon there again, and Lawrence's personal lawyer, and a prepared document package sitting at her seat. She read the cover letter while Lawrence spoke. The language was careful and corporate, the kind of language designed to sound regretful while meaning something ruthless. Quinn's involvement had become misaligned with the firm's strategic direction. They were offering her a buyout at a price Philip would later confirm was 42% below actual market value. The offer was valid for 48 hours. If she declined, they would proceed to a shareholder vote to restructure leadership. She looked up from the document. Lawrence was watching her with an expression she recognized now. The performance of reluctance. The face of a man pretending to do something difficult that he'd been planning for months. She thought about her father. She thought about the photograph he'd kept on his credenza, the 2 of them at their first major project in Scarborough, Quinn barely 20, wearing a hard hat 3 sizes too large and grinning like she'd helped build the CN Tower. She thought about Philip's voice on the phone 2 years ago, walking her through documents she'd been too grieved to fully absorb. She thought about Robin at this same table, saying you have 1 shot at this. She picked up the pen. She signed the acknowledgement. She stood. Thank you for being so clear, Lawrence, she said. I'll be in touch. She walked to the elevator and called Philip before the doors had finished closing. Quinn arrived at Hartwell plus Fitch the next morning at 8:15. She wore the navy blazer her father had bought her the day she passed her architectural registration exams, the one she'd kept at the back of her closet because it felt too much like armor and she'd always been afraid to need armor. She needed it now. The receptionist at the front desk looked up with careful neutrality. Good morning, Quinn. Mr. Fitch has been in since. I know. Quinn smiled at her. Check your email. You should have received updated access instructions this morning. The receptionist looked at her screen. Her expression shifted. Go right ahead, she said. Quinn took the elevator to the 4th floor. Philip was already in the boardroom with 2 associates from his litigation firm. Robin was there. Frank Ossie sat at the corner of the table with a thick folder in front of him. The 3 remaining senior partners, people her father had recruited, people who had known Quinn since she was a graduate student doing summer work at the firm, were seated and waiting. Lawrence arrived 6 minutes later. He pushed open the boardroom door expecting Quinn understood. To find the space empty, he stopped when he saw the room. His gaze moved across the faces at the table and landed on Quinn sitting at the head of it, the same chair he had occupied yesterday when he delivered his offer. His face did something complicated and terrible. What is this? He said. I didn't call a partners meeting. I did. Quinn's voice was quiet. Sit down, Lawrence. You don't have the standing to. Actually, she does. Philip rose from his chair. Mr. Fitch, I'm Philip Ben, trustee of the Stewart Hartwell Family Trust. As of 8:53 this morning, the trust activation conditions have been met. When Quinn signed the acknowledgement of your buyout offer yesterday, she triggered the automatic transfer of Stewart Hartwell's shares to her direct ownership. Quinn now holds 52% of Hartwell plus Fitch Design Group, making her the majority shareholder. She is exercising her right under Section 14(b) of your partnership agreement to call an emergency partners meeting. Lawrence's face went the color of old paper. Your father's trust, he said slowly, as though the words didn't make sense in the order Philip had arranged them. He looked at Quinn. You knew. I've known for 8 months, she said, since I found the Northgate files. The room shifted. The senior partners leaned forward. Quinn opened the folder in front of her. She distributed documents around the table. Robin's forensic report, Frank's investigation notes, bank records for Northgate Consulting Services Limited, Lawrence's authorization signatures on 14 separate transactions totaling $1.4 million, transferred over 22 months to an account registered to his nephew. The boardroom was absolutely quiet. Carolyn Wu, who had been a senior partner for 11 years, and who had worked alongside Stewart Hartwell for 9 of them, looked at Lawrence across the table. Tell me these documents are wrong, she said. Lawrence said nothing. Tell me there's an explanation. He sat down. Quinn didn't think he chose to. It looked more like his legs had quietly stopped cooperating. I'm calling for an immediate partners vote to remove Lawrence Fitch from his position as CFO and co-managing partner, Quinn said. All in favor? Every hand went up except his. The motion passes. Philip made a note. Mr. Fitch, you are formally suspended pending investigation. All signing authority is revoked effective immediately. You will surrender all company access and property, and security will escort you from the premises. Lawrence looked at Quinn. His expression had moved through shock and was now somewhere smaller. Not quite remorse but a kind of deflation, as though whatever had been holding him upright for 20 years had quietly left without notice. I built this firm too, he said. Alongside your father I put 20 years into this place. I know you did, Quinn said, and then you spent 22 months stealing from it. Frank Ossie stepped into the hallway and returned with a building security officer. Lawrence didn't argue. He walked out of the boardroom without touching the documents on the table, without meeting the eyes of the partners who watched him go. Brandon Fitch, who Quinn had arranged to have waiting in the lobby under the impression he was attending a routine review, was escorted out 9 minutes later. Quinn sat in the boardroom for a long time after everyone had filed out. Carolyn Wu paused at the door on her way out. Your father would be proud of you, she said. I want you to know that. Quinn nodded. Her throat was too tight to answer. The weeks that followed moved in a controlled blur. The Ontario Securities Commission opened a formal investigation within 10 days of Quinn's referral. The evidence Robin and Frank had assembled was, according to the investigator assigned to the case, unusually clean, a word Quinn found darkly satisfying. Lawrence and Brandon hired separate lawyers and immediately began attributing blame to each other, which the investigator described to Quinn with professional restraint as not uncommon, and unlikely to help either of them. The firm's bank filed a civil recovery action for the transferred funds. Lawrence's personal assets were frozen pending the investigation. His legal fees alone, Philip told her, would consume most of what he had left outside the firm. The partnership agreement required Quinn to offer Lawrence the right to sell his 48% back to the firm at fair market value before any forced restructuring. She made the offer. His lawyer accepted within 4 days. The transaction closed in 3 weeks. Hartwell plus Fitch Design Group became Quinn Hartwell's firm entirely. She stood in her father's old office on a Tuesday afternoon and looked out at the Toronto skyline. All those buildings her father had spent 30 years contributing to, the glass towers and low-rise neighborhoods and waterfront cranes, and she let herself feel the full weight of it. Not triumph exactly. Something more complicated than that. Relief, underneath which there was grief, underneath which there was a kind of bedrock quiet she hadn't felt since before he died. She called, Robin. It's done, she said when Robin answered. Is it really done? Not all of it, but enough. The firm is mine. There was a pause and then Robin said, Stuart would have loved this. He absolutely would have loved every single part of this. Quinn smiled, her eyes stinging. I know, she said, I know he would. The hardest part, she found over the months that followed, wasn't the legal proceedings or the board restructuring or the careful conversations with clients who'd heard rumors and needed reassurance. The hardest part was the question she kept asking herself in the dark of early mornings. How did I not see it sooner? She talked about it with her therapist, Dr. Anisha Sharma, whom she'd been seeing since shortly after her father's death. You trusted him, Dr. Sharma said. He was your father's partner. He was at your family's table for 19 years. Trusting him wasn't naive, it was the only reasonable response to that much shared history. He was stealing while he stood at my father's grave next to me. I know. Dr. Sharma was quiet for a moment, and that's a particular kind of grief, discovering that someone who was part of your loss was also part of its cause. That takes time. Don't rush the processing of it. Quinn didn't rush it. She went to her sessions. She called Robin when the nights were difficult. She ran the firm. And slowly she found that she was actually quite good at it. Under her leadership, the firm took on 3 civic projects she'd wanted to pursue for years: a mixed-income housing development in Regent Park, a new branch library in Hamilton, a waterfront activation in a Lake Erie community, whose mayor had been trying to get a meeting for 2 years, and whom Lawrence had quietly turned away. She expanded the team. She promoted Alicia from reception to office manager, and gave her the salary she'd been worth since her 2nd month. She also made one decision she hadn't planned on. She renamed the firm. Hartwell plus Fitch Design Group had been the name on the King Street offices for 11 years. Quinn's lawyers confirmed she was within her rights to change it. She thought about it for 2 weeks and then told the signage company to remove everything after the plus sign. Just Hartwell Design Group, her father's name, clean and whole, the way it had always deserved to be. Robin told her it was exactly right. Lawrence pled guilty to fraud and breach of fiduciary duty 14 months later. The sentencing hearing was on a gray Thursday in March. Quinn had written a victim impact statement. She'd debated whether to read it in person, and then decided she needed to. She needed Lawrence to hear it in her voice in the room. She stood at the front of the courtroom and read without looking up until the final paragraph. Then she raised her eyes to where he sat at the defense table and finished from memory. You were at my father's table for 19 years. You held his arm at his mother's funeral. You gave a toast at my anniversaries that made my mother cry happy tears. And while you were standing at his grave beside me, you had already been stealing from the company he spent his life building for 9 months. I have stopped trying to understand how you justified that to yourself. I don't think I'm meant to understand it. She folded the paper. My father left me the tools to protect what he built. I was fortunate enough to find them in time. Not everyone is. I hope that wherever you are from here, you think about what he built and why he built it, and what would have happened to the people who gave their careers to that company if you had succeeded. She walked back to her seat. Robin squeezed her hand under the table. The judge sentenced Lawrence to 26 months and ordered full restitution of the $1.4 million plus the firm's legal costs. Brandon received a conditional sentence and community service hours for his role in operating the shell company. Lawrence's professional certifications were revoked. He would never hold a fiduciary position again. He was led from the courtroom without looking at her. Quinn stood outside on the courthouse steps afterward in the cold March air, hands in her coat pockets, watching the last of the winter traffic move along University Avenue. A streetcar went by, lit orange through the gray afternoon. Okay, Robin asked, standing beside her. Getting there, Quinn said. Robin put her arm around her, and they stood there for a while. Just stood there in the cold, letting the morning settle. He thought you were decorative, Robin said eventually. That's what I keep thinking about. He looked at you for 2 years and saw someone he could manage out. Someone who wouldn't notice. Someone who wouldn't fight. Quinn watched the streetcar disappear down the block. He had no idea what was in my father's files, she said. No, Robin agreed, he really didn't. A year and a half after Quinn walked out of Lawrence's boardroom with the signed acknowledgement form in his folder, Hartwell Design Group held a small reception at the Regent Park development site. It was a cool September evening. Employees, clients, city councilors, the residents' association who had fought for the development for over a decade, they all came. Quinn's mother came. She was 72 and walked with a cane now, and she stood in front of the building for a long time without saying anything. Your father drew something like this once, she said finally, years ago, on a napkin at our kitchen table after a glass of wine, when he was explaining to me what he wanted the firm to eventually do. I still have the napkin somewhere in a drawer. She looked at Quinn. He always said you'd do it better than he did. Quinn linked her arm through her mother's, and they stayed until the caterers started packing up. That evening she went to Mount Pleasant Cemetery with flowers from the shop on Young Street, the same shop her father used to stop at every Friday on his way home. She sat on the bench beside his headstone and told him about the project, about the firm, about the sentencing and the restitution and how the sign looked now, just Hartwell, just his name, finally. She talked for a while and then she sat quietly and listened to the wind in the maples overhead. She had thought for a long time that what Lawrence did would be the thing that defined this chapter of her life, the moment when everything went wrong and she had to claw it back. But sitting here, she understood something different. Lawrence had forced open a door her father had left carefully unlocked, and what she'd walked through it into was not just the firm, not just the ownership or the resolution or the restitution. It was herself, who she actually was when she had no choice but to be exactly that person, without performance or pretense or the comfort of someone else making the hard calls. She had learned she was patient. She had learned she was strategic. She had learned she could hold a secret for 8 months and show up to work every day and do the job well, while everything underneath was quietly shifting into position. She had learned she was her father's daughter in ways she had not yet fully understood. I've got it from here, Dad, she said to the stone and the maple and the quiet. The wind moved through the leaves above her. She stayed a while longer and then she stood, and she walked back to her car, and she drove home through the lit-up city her father had helped build. The city that was in part hers to keep building now.